The Simpsons.
Hello, and welcome to The Simpsons Countdown, the podcast where we go back to the beginning and watch all of The Simpsons, to trace its creative evolution and count down, finding the exact moment in which the show began to, for better or worse, suck. I'm your host, Erix Antoine, and this week I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Dan Lebofsky. He's an expat, much like myself. He's a musician, much like myself. He's been living up here in La Paz, Bolivia for a while now, but he is Canadian, and I am not. Anyway, we are discussing the episode Bart the General, which originally aired on February 4th, 1990. This is the episode that introduces the character of Nelson Muntz as a bully who mercilessly terrorizes Bart until a coalition of the abused is formed and they wage war on Nelson, pummeling him with water balloons. It's a fun little episode and it gives us a bunch to talk about. Among other things, we focus on retirement homes, on treatment of the elderly in North as opposed to South America, because there is indeed a marked cultural difference. We go all over the place, as is our custom here, but the main topic is, of course, The Simpsons, its cultural relevance and impact, and our own personal experiences in watching and reacting to this seminal television series, as it has evolved throughout the last 30 years. So, whether in your car, on the train, on the treadmill, shower, or toilet, I hope you enjoy the discussion that follows. Here we go. So, how you doing today, Dan?
Good. It's hot as hell.
It's a hot day. I haven't been out yet.
Here, how many feet are we above sea level?
Feet, meter, I have no idea. What is it? Do you know?
No, I should.
Isn't it? Is it?
It's 3,600, right?
3,600 meters.
Yeah.
I don't know what 3,600 meters is in feet.
Almost 3 times, so 10,000 feet above sea level.
Okay, so we're 10,000. Yeah, so we're about 10,000 feet above sea level here in La Paz, Bolivia, on a hot day.
No sunscreen.
No sunscreen. Do you use sunscreen typically?
I should. I mean, definitely the times I've traveled back from Vancouver to here, I'll get like really bad sunburns on my face.
And that's what,
like a woman here in the street stopped me one time. She's like, "Oh my God," in English, like you should go to the hospital.
Fear of melanoma and whatever else. I actually don't wear sunscreen. I wear caps. I should. I've got like this. I've got some sunscreen, and I sometimes remember to like put it on before I go out, but it almost never happens. So blazing hot sun here. It's not so much.
It's because we're so high up.
Yeah.
The atmosphere is so thin. I guess. What would I know? Meteorologist all of a sudden.
Yeah, but it's been. I mean, it's been like we've had pretty shitty weather for the past month.
Yeah.
So to have, I mean, it's been like raining. Tremendously, like constantly. This is the carnival season. We just finished. It was just carnival here in Bolivia, and that will relate to the episode we're talking about today because there's a lot of playing with water going on, water balloons, but it is interesting how this is the rainy season, but it's also the carnival season. So it's interesting how during a time when kids like to go out and play with water, it's raining.
Yeah.
Like a fuck outside,
and like
every day.
There's been less and less of the playing with water, which is a good thing.
Well, I mean, ever since we had that water crisis a couple of years ago, yes. Did you grow up watching The Simpsons?
Oh, of course.
Something that, I mean, because you grew up in Vancouver?
I did, but born in Vancouver, and then I lived there until I was about 4 or 5, and then we moved to Australia for 4 years. And we came back to Vancouver in 90. And I think the first time, I don't remember the first time I saw the show, but I remember I had like a Simpsons book, which I got for Christmas, which was the Christmas episode, but in book form.
Like a comic book?
Like a comic book.
I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, not like it had like a flat spine, but yeah, it was a comic book.
Right, I mean, it was the
one with Santa's Little Helper, right? I haven't
right,
back.
Right. That's where the characters introduced. So it was like a comic book adaptation of the Christmas special.
Yes.
Okay.
And I remember having that for sure. And I don't remember watching the show for the first time, but I remember watching it religiously all the way up until about, when it wasn't worth watching anymore.
Right.
It was about, 15 years ago now.
It's got to be something like that. I mean, I've tried to do the calculations. Some people would say that it's longer, but I personally haven't watched it regularly in at least 15 years.
For sure. I mean, these first season episodes, they're good, but for me, like the golden era was like a couple of years ago. I rewatched the 7th season, the one that starts with Who Shot Mr. Burns, and that season is amazing. It's hilarious. And so right around that time, which would have been 96-ish, I guess. So like late 90s, I mean, for sure, when I was a teenager, obsessed with The Simpsons. I guess everybody is, because Simpsons memes are so popular and everybody can understand them.
Right, and they always tend to be from that era that you're talking about.
Yeah, because it was like from like a 2010 episode.
Right,
Nobody would get it.
Yeah, and not only would nobody get it, it probably wouldn't be funny. I don't. So, had you seen this episode before?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember laughing at the part where he coughs up his hat pretty intensely when I was, 9 or whatever. I saw this the first time.
Yeah, that happens frequently in this episode, which is actually pretty cartoonish. There are a couple of elements that we need to just to mention. This is the 5th episode, and it is the first episode that doesn't have a full opening sequence.
Yeah,
they probably did that for timing reasons.
Probably,
I would imagine. Yeah, they needed that extra minute or whatever it is, minute and a half.
And they have Bart. What do you call that when he's like, and they put the credits over him? What do you call that?
What do you mean?
Well, at the end, he's like, the only good wars have been.
Oh, you mean like the coda, the thing that they do?
The coda,
yeah,
coda, right?
Yeah.
And they have the credits scroll over, but yeah, no couch gag,
no blackboard gag, not just like it just goes straight into the show. And a couple of firsts here. It's the first appearance of Nelson, literally first appearance. Like he hadn't even appeared as a background character, and
who ends up being one of the best characters.
Yes, yeah, they ended up really fleshing him out. Here he's basically just a thug, and then
he's right out of the box. He's got his vest and his t-shirt,
right,
his haircut,
right,
shorts.
Right. First time that Grandpa, not the first time he appears because he's in the Christmas episode, but like briefly, but it's the first time that he's an actual like character in the story.
Yeah, and then when they bring him in when he's writing his letter to whoever.
Yeah, that's a funny scene. And
Jasper. Right,
Jasper's the guy that comes in, and then they're...
I said give me that puzzle.
No.
Gimme!
No!
Gimme!
No! Keep the kids here!
No!
It's interesting, in these first episodes, you see these characters. On the one hand, you have Grandpa. He's obviously one of the family members, so obviously he's going to be a main character. But you also have characters like Jasper, who I'm pretty sure that when they did that, they didn't know. Like they just said we need this old guy to come in and sort of fight with Grandpa Simpson to demonstrate that he's also being bullied or whatever. It's part of the theme of the episode.
And they figure we might as well use him again.
Right. I mean, he's an interesting character. He's got a cool look.
He's got a very
So,
very distinctive. I like having that continuity with series. I don't like it, for example, like in The Sopranos. Like the first time you see Michael Imperioli's character, his mother is a different actress. Same with in Seinfeld. The first time you see, I forget if it's Jerry's or George's parents, but they're different actors.
Yeah, well, that's about Seinfeld. To that point, that was actually a deliberate thing, I think. Okay, so the actor that played George's father in like the first season or second season, whenever it was, like when he first appeared, is actor John Randolph, who also played Stephen Keaton's father in Family Ties.
Okay. But obviously everybody knows George's father is Jerry Stiller.
Of course. So and he only appeared once, right, as that character, and so I guess he just wasn't funny enough, or they just didn't. They needed somebody funnier once they decided they were going to flesh out. But did it bother you? Like, would you have preferred like you're talking about how in the continuity thing when they change characters,
it's a little bit like unsatisfying in some way. I don't know. It's like a obsessive compulsive.
Yeah, but you wouldn't have wanted. I mean, you wouldn't have preferred. You wouldn't have wanted John Randolph to be George Costanza.
No.
I mean,
I'm glad they made the change.
Right.
Obviously, but it's still like when you go back and watch, it's like, oh.
To be fair, in the case of Seinfeld, for the reruns, I think for the syndication, they actually reshot all the scenes for that episode with Jerry Stiller. But here's the thing: so Seinfeld was on Hulu. It's still on Hulu, I think. And I I actually went through the whole series, and for whatever reason, in that in the version that's on Hulu, it's still John Randolph.
Huh.
So
there's two versions out there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where you can find the syndicated version of that episode where it's Jerry Stiller.
I'm here to see Grandpa.
Half the people here are named Grandpa.
Well, Grandpa Simpson, then.
That scene where Bart goes to meet Grandpa, when he first, I mean, that there's something very, like, sad about. I don't know if they intended it, but like, because I'm here to see Grandpa, and then like all the doors open,
Right.
And that's like kind of heartbreaking. Like, it's a poignant thing. I don't think that people really think about it, and it's very much the whole idea of putting people in a home is a very distinctly American phenomenon, I guess. I mean, it doesn't happen. For example, like
here it doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen at all. You know, here in this culture, Latin American culture, and neither of us were born here, but we've lived here long enough that we've assimilated the culture, and you don't see that here. You don't see in most families. I mean, their elderly stay with them throughout.
Absolutely, and a lot of family disputes.
Yes,
like the grandparents will die,
right,
and then all my friends here, not all of them, but a lot, common story.
And it's over money, of course.
It's over usually a house.
Yeah, property, yeah, right. Because the grandparents passed away and left the house to all their children, but now they're all fighting over
so complicated.
Yeah, it's pretty maddening. But you know, at least they don't stick them in a home somewhere.
Yeah.
Would you say I've never actually been to a? I mean, I've been fortunate that hasn't happened in my family, or it just in whatever case.
I know my parents told me a story of when I was in preschool. They took us to sing in an old folks' home.
Okay,
and I came home crying.
You don't remember this?
I don't remember this. They've told me about this.
Right. Well, retirement homes,
just because it was so creepy.
Yeah, I mean, I have no experience. I've never been to one. I've never, you know, because of that, because of what and I've been living here, mainly here for over 25 years. So I've just never had that experience. So I don't even know how accurate it is. It's only what you see in movies like Cocoon.
I'd say it's pretty accurate. I might have had to do something for school in high school, like some sort of volunteering thing, and I can't remember. But anyway, so it is like American, Canadian, but like The Simpsons is global. So when people here watch The Simpsons, right, what do you think they think of that? Or that's
well, I think
that's what gringos do.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that
they think we all put like
but there's that perception that people have here, where it's like there is this perception that when you talk to people locally about American culture, and for them, like the Simpsons becomes a window into American culture, even though it's global in its popularity, it's still a window into America, and it's still about America. So like
living in a college dorm.
Right. These are, again, things that are very alien to people here in Latin America, I would think in general, but definitely here in Bolivia. But so they see that and go, oh, well, it's an interesting glimpse. But of course, it perpetuates certain, I guess, stereotypes where it's here, like if you're American, well, guess what? The moment you're 18, your parents boot you out of the house because you're off to college, and then you're off to like live somewhere or whatever. And as soon as you reach retirement age, boom, you're in a home. You know, like that's it. These are stereotypes, right? Whereas here, as you said, there are 4 generations. I mean, you have people in their 40s that are still living at home. And
lots of people still living at home.
Right, and it's not even an abnormality. It's not like...
No, not at all.
You know, it's not something where like, oh, you know, look at this like fat loser living in his mother's basement or whatever in his 40s. No, it's like, no, you know, he's still living at home because that's where he's living, but he's got a job. You know, he's fine. It's like it's all fine. It just seems that some of these stereotypes, you know, they're just stereotypes. They're like American stereotypes, although they're based in there's a certain truth to them because it's the way the society works there.
Serenity now!
Is this true that the town is called Springfield because there is a Springfield in every state in the U.S.?
I've heard about that, actually.
Is that an urban myth?
I don't know if there's literally a Springfield in every state, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were.
Yeah.
Because there's got to be a Springfield, like New York.
Springfield, Illinois.
There's Springfield, Illinois. So yeah, I mean, if it's not entirely true, it's probably close to true. Yeah. And it just, because they wanted it to be sort of an any town USA.
Right.
They chose to set it in a town as opposed to a big city, I guess, because it's just easier, the whole suburban upbringing kind of thing. But then it forced them to eventually really sort of expand on the universe of Springfield so that they could do all kinds of storytelling, that could move beyond the small town ideas. But in these first episodes, right, it's a fairly quaint suburban town.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's where it
with the nuclear power plant.
With a nuclear power plant, right? Speaking of which, I just watched that HBO miniseries, the Chernobyl.
I think I watched the first one, and then I tapped out. It was good, but
it's good, but it was
a little too bleak.
It is an incredibly depressing 5 hours of television.
Yeah, I'll get around to watching.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly bleak is the word you used, and that's the correct word.
What does the decimeter say?
3.6 Roentgen, but that's as high as the meter.
3.6. Not great, not terrible.
And so in this episode, Bart is bullied. He's the victim of a bully, of Nelson, and they use that as an opportunity to parody war movies.
Yeah.
It
seemed like, when they're doing their Bart's leading the school kids. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, he goes to get advice from Grandpa, who takes him to an army surplus store.
Oh yeah, that's the first thing. Yes,
which is, and I worked at it. It wasn't a full army surplus store, but it had army surplus. It was called. This was in Vancouver. It was called Three Vets, like veterans. It was like camping, hiking shoes, fishing stuff, and army surplus. And we got like a lot of interesting folks.
Well, the character of Herman's rather interesting.
Yeah,
he's painted as a war vet. It's the whole thing where you go in and you think that he might be a war vet, and then
because he's an amputee.
He's an amputee, but then it turns out that that's not the reason he lost his arm.
Next time your teacher tells you to keep your arm inside the bus window, you do it.
You pointed out while we were watching the episode how he basically has a very familiar sounding voice.
Yeah, and I was like, who is that? And you were like, that's Flanders. I'm like, it is.
Right. Well, I think Harry Shearer did his voice, which he also does Flanders' voice, and he ultimately, I guess, decided that he would just, again, the character is still being developed. I think Flanders had appeared.
Because Herman's one of those kind of Jasper characters.
Yeah, and I don't think he even shows up as much as Jasper does. He just he shows up here and then he'll pop up here and there eventually, but he's never developed to that. They never really went back to him. But yeah, Harry Shearer does Herman. And I guess he just figured, fuck it. And he kind of tweaks it slightly and makes him sound a bit like George Bush. Like George Bush Sr., George Bush the father. H.W. Bush.
Military man, CIA. Has Flanders shown up in the season?
He was in the at this point, he was in the Christmas episode. Yeah. Not particularly prominently, but he's kind of just there, a background character. They hadn't quite developed him yet. So I think, again, it's the sort of thing where Harry Shearer was just like, I'll do this kind of George Bush type voice, which ultimately sounds a lot like Flanders. He ends up giving that same sort of inflection to Flanders. So it's a parody of war movies. It uses the music from Patton.
Oh, okay. I knew I'd heard that
right
somewhere before.
That's Patton. Right. Yeah. That's straight out of Patton. It uses
that shot where it's silhouetted against the sunset and it's them on the jungle gym.
Right. That's
the obstacle course. I'm pretty sure that's Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, that's straight. That's ripping a shot from. Yeah, it's either Full Metal Jacket or Platoon or one. Well, it's got to be Full Metal Jacket. Full Metal Jacket is the one that's got the training.
Right.
It's got the boot camp section. Platoon doesn't have that. So it's the Full Metal. It's a Full Metal Jacket parody. You have the whole thing. It's just a parody of war movies. It is kind of interesting how it's built up to be it's like a parody of a war movie where you have the boot camp section and then you have the war section. But when you really look at it, the war section is a little anticlimactic if you really think about it. It's more like Nelson shows up and the kids show up and they pummel them with balloons and that's the end of it. Yeah. It kind of just ends. Like it's weird. It's like they build it up, but then the actual it's just they just massacre Nelson.
And now that I'm thinking about it, The Wire, season 4, don't they go after one of their the kids?
I mean, it's been a while since I've seen The Wire.
Season 4 is the one with the kids.
Season 4 is the one with the school.
Yeah, and there is a scene where let's get back at him. It's not a bully. It's like a rival drug dealer who's also 12, right?
Right.
And they go after him with water balloons, which are filled with piss.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, contrary to what you've just seen, war is neither glamorous nor fun. There are no winners, only losers. There are no good wars. Peace, man.
And then at the end, you talked about the coda when Bart Simpson shows up. I'm trying to figure out if it was intended to be a parody of like He-Man or He-Man or G.I. Joe.
Well, like, listen, kids, and that's the kind of... I was thinking about this too, this whole episode, because it's about bullying, but there's no like after-school special anti-bullying message.
Right. Ultimately, the message in the end is not even about bullying. It's about war's not cool. By the way, I know this episode was a lot of fun to watch because it's fun and they were playing war, but war is not actually a cool thing. So that's why I don't I'm trying to figure out are they doing a parody of He-Man or was it Spin Control? For them?
Like He-Man would have those by the way, kids, or I remember Inspector Gadget. I remember seeing one when I was a kid where it was about alcohol. If someone passes you a drink and it smells or it tastes funny, with Inspector Gadget and Penny, it was kind of a morality lesson at the end of the episode. I guess it's becoming even evident the 5th episode that it's not like a kid's show, The Simpsons. If it were a kid's show, there would be. Well,
one thing, if it were a kid's show, they probably wouldn't have. The one key thing about the development of The Simpsons in this first season is that, yes, they were trying to ground it, make it sort of a realistic thing where it's a cartoon, but it's aimed at adults more than children. But at the same time, they recognized that Bart was kind of a popular breakout type character, and they also knew it would appeal to kids because it's a cartoon and it's on. Kids are going to watch it, and I think in this first season especially, there's a lot of Bart. The first episode.
Yeah, before it became Homer based.
Exactly, it's very focused. Like the first episode that aired was Bart the Genius, even if it wasn't the first one produced, but it was the first one that aired, focused around Bart. A couple of episodes later, you had you had sort of Homer-centric episodes, Homer's Odyssey, and then There's No Disgrace Like Homer, kind of centered around him or around his dilemma. But then again, here's Bart. Here's like an adventure almost entirely centered around him, and it's about kids. It's very kid-centered. It's about bullying, and it's about this. And so yeah, maybe that thing at the end, in some way, it's parody, but then it was also intended as a kind of spin control because they figured. They're already going to get pummeled by parents for being edgy, too edgy for kids.
Right.
Which, it's so quaint, it's so tame when you watch it now. But at that time, 30 years ago, this may have seemed really edgy. Oh, the kid, his nose is bleeding.
But do you also think maybe that kids don't even get the irony? Because I remember the first time I saw Revenge of the Nerds, I thought it was a drama.
Well, that's new. Okay, so tell me about that. So
I was in grade 4 and I saw it on TV, and I thought it was like nerds versus the jocks. I didn't get any of the jokes.
So you figured it was a realistic portrayal of this is how it is. This is a dramatic story.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
And I would have been at the same age because I was in 4th grade. Because I can't remember, but it was I had to draw something in school, and I drew I think there's a scene in Revenge of the Nerds with the jocks toilet paper or do something to their dorm and spray paint nerds on it.
Right.
And I drew that, but being sincere about it, completely 100%. And 4th grade, so I would have been 8 or 9. It would have been the same age. That would have been 1990. That would have been this. So I wouldn't have got any of that's Full Metal Jacket or
that stuff. No, that the
I just remember laughing my ass off when he coughed up his hat.
Right, that guy. But the obviously the film references to Full Metal Jacket and whatnot, any of that stuff would fly over kids' heads. But that are you saying that maybe a kid, a 9-year-old watching this episode of Bart the General, this episode would take it seriously?
I think so.
Like as like a hard hitting portrayal
of bullying. Yes.
And like he'd be like, oh, because maybe he would identify with. I was like, oh, there's a bully in my school.
I can't put myself in that mindset now, but like I said, I thought Revenge of the Nerds was a serious drama the first time I saw it when I was that age. So yeah, it would have been kind of.
I mean, well, then in that case, I mean, maybe the writers anticipated that and figured like, well, they knew kids would be watching. So if somebody extrapolates that idea of a 9-year-old taking it seriously, taking the concept of the episode seriously, so you do put in that little tag at the end, just so that 9-year-old understands, hey, what you just watched, you might have found this entertaining, but this isn't. War's not a cool thing. Like,
right.
don't.
And that was 1990. I mean, might have been right around the Gulf War, right?
Yeah, about a year before,
right
before it erupted. Yeah, something like that. So I mean, they were about to get a taste of what that really was, even though it only lasted like 3 or 4 days. But
version 1.
Yeah, version 1. Version 2 is still going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it just seems so quaint now, though.
Maybe they weren't parodying Inspector Gadget or He-Man with that code at the end, just the writers having fun.
I think they were doing a little bit of both. I think it was like, let's put this in and we'll do it in the style, because you have Bart sitting there like in a library, and I do remember that there were many instances where whenever you had these tags at the end of a show, like it tended to be framed that way, like very almost academic, with an academic background, like you had the character in a library or
right.
It was very stupid.
I'm trying to think about specific ones. I mean, there was that. What's the show with fucking what you're talking about, Willis? Different Strokes.
Right, Different Strokes.
I mean, there was an episode like the bicycle salesman.
Oh,
or something
of course.
like
No, that's a classic. The Different Strokes.
I mean, the coda at the end, the more or less is like really kind of dark and serious.
Well, that episode is really fucked up. Like it's.
I've never seen the whole thing. I've just seen it in reference to
the Bicycle Man. I think is what it's called.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. That is an incredible piece of television. I cannot believe that. Like that is a story. I can't believe what they got away with. That stuff used to go on all the time with a lot of the sitcoms of like the 80s. And, I mean, Different Strokes is famous for it because there's so much of it in Different Strokes for whatever reason. That one was like the king of the very special episode.
Right.
And touching on subjects that were unbelievable. I mean, like they actually went.
When they all got super serious all of a sudden. Right.
Well, there's that one. That's the very famous one. The Bicycle Man is the famous one because that's the one about the pedophile at the bike shop. And then there's another one where Arnold and Kimberly get kidnapped.
What?
They're like at a mall and this guy like kidnaps them. It's like a 2-part episode. Kidnaps them and basically this guy wants to like rape Kimberly.
Jesus.
There's that one. Then there's like. There's a slightly more quaint one where it's towards the end because it's already with Sam. That was the blonde kid that came to live with them. And this one is that so Arnold and Sam, they befriend a street clown, this like who performs across the street from the apartment, like in Central Park, and they're there hanging out with her or whatever, and they watch her have an epileptic seizure.
What?
And they don't know what's going on. Like, oh my god, and they like run away. Right, and then they're like they don't want to hang out with her anymore. Like they get freaked out because they don't want to hang out with her because they're afraid they'll catch her.
So the lesson is about respecting people who are different,
right? Or just just understanding that that I really don't understand it. It's a weird. I don't really know what the message is supposed to be. Like it doesn't. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't even know what the message is supposed to be because they're afraid they're going to catch epilepsy, so they run away from the street performer. But then it turns out that the housekeeper, which wasn't Mrs. Garrett anymore, it's like the other one. Like they're hanging out at the apartment. They start making fun of the street performer. They start twisting around and shaking around and making fun of her, right? Mm-hmm. And then the housekeeper sees that and she's like, "Stop that, you two! That's terrible what you're doing." And then she goes like, "I'm epileptic, really?" And then it just becomes this thing where that's
so their nanny has epilepsy.
Right, the nanny turns out to be epileptic. Says, "I have epilepsy."
Yeah.
You get this straight, Sam. This is your family from now on. And stay away from that telephone. You step out of line just once. Can you remember what I told you I would do? I will kill your parents, Sam. You hear me and understand me.
Yes, sir.
I mean, did The Simpsons ever have a serious turn? Ever?
No, not really. That's
maybe
the thing. Thank God.
Years later, when Homer finally meets his mom, they have a coda at the end where he's just sitting on the trunk of his car.
Oh well, if you mean like if the Simpsons ever got sort of like serious or yeah, occasionally they went for like a dramatic note, and I think this happened a little bit more often in the earlier episodes than in the later ones because they were still sort of grounded. But it's not so much. It wasn't so like forced, like a very special episode of like different strokes. It was more like putting that dramedy sort of touch,
right?
The James L. Brooks touch,
right, just here and there.
You know, the James L. Brooks touch of putting in that poignant moment. You know, making it because this is a funny show, but you know the idea of a guy of Homer reconnecting with his mom, like that's actually supposed to be touching and
right, so
heartbreaking.
Acknowledge that.
Right, or the episode that comes later on where Bart, you know, tricks Mrs. Krabappel into thinking that you know
right that Woodrow.
Yeah, Woodrow. Like I can't wait to talk about that one. That's actually one of my favorites. But again, like that has sort of a poignant ending, and so they did occasionally do stuff like that where, yeah, this was funny, but in the end, you know, we're gonna have a nice little button at the end that's supposed to kind of pull at the heartstrings. You know what I mean? And so the thing you're talking about with Homer, that's what that is. But here, no. Here it's more like it's a traditional. Here's the lesson that you were supposed to learn, or here's what you need to keep in mind. And I think that in this case they did it primarily, one, to parody that concept, but also for their own spin control, so that parents couldn't say, oh, they're glorifying violence, they're glorifying war. My 9-year-old watched this and he thinks that Revenge of the Nerds is a drama, and I do think that there's a bit of spin control there. So when Grandpa's introduced in this episode, he's introduced as an old coot who's like writing a letter. It's not clear who he's writing the letter
Dear
to.
advertisers.
Oh, okay, it's right.
It too, so
just advertisers. And what is he complaining about? And what is he trying? Like the concept of this letter that he's writing, he's complaining about the portrayal of elderly people on television.
I am disgusted with the way old people are depicted on television. We are not all vibrant, fun-loving sex maniacs.
Because supposedly that is true, that like people in old folks' homes really go at it, like sex-wise. Like I read this thing about like venereal disease in old folks' homes because they don't have to worry about pregnancy.
That's true. So
no birth control, and some of them do. You know, grew up maybe not even using condoms, or I don't know.
Well, they came from a different time where it's like, oh,
and like, what else are you gonna do?
Right, the Vatican roulette.
Like, if you can still do it, I guess.
Well, I mean, more power to you.
I'm not playing
but,
bingo all day or whatever else you do. Or
so you're saying you've read something about there being like VD outbreaks?
For sure, like listeners, Google this. Like venereal disease in old folks' homes is a thing. Like,
wow, well, that's kind of fascinating.
So maybe it's always been a thing, even back in 1990. So when Grandpa, in his letter, you know, dear advertisers, when he says whatever he says, you know.
Well, that makes me think. That actually makes me think of the movie Cocoon.
Mm-hmm.
You've seen Cocoon,
yeah?
Right. So like,
remember it much with what's his name, the oatmeal guy,
Wilford Brimley, the oatmeal guy, Wilford Brimley. Interesting tidbit, and I always like to point this out about Wilford Brimley. Wilford Brimley was about 2 years younger than Johnny Depp is today when he starred in Cocoon.
You know what?
He was like 49.
I saw this thing on Twitter. Somebody and went super viral. It had been retweeted like tens of thousands of times. But the person asked, seriously though, do people in the 1950s, did they look older, younger? And they do. Well,
I mean, it's the thing. It's true. Like I was.
It's not just the way they dress.
Like, it's just there's a certain. I mean, Wilford Brimley was fucking 49 years old. I mean, he's playing older, clearly, because I mean, if you're 49 and you're in a retirement home, there's a problem. But I mean, but he was a 49-year-old man. In Cocoon.
Whoa.
He was 49 when he shot Cocoon.
Well, that's
the guy. I mean, he looks like in his 60s or whatever, but still like or even older. But it's just it's mind-boggling how, you know, he was younger than Johnny Depp.
Right. And it's not like Johnny Depp is like taking great care of himself.
I mean, he
likes to party.
Yeah, he pretty fairly. I mean, I assume he's vegan, you know.
Yeah,
but apart from that,
did you read that Rolling Stone thing that came out a few years ago?
What happened?
He's accusing all his managers of stealing millions of dollars, but it's just because he's crazy with his spending. Just crazy with it. He invests in all these like fancy wines, but he drinks them. Like all these like wines are supposed to be like investments, like, you know, park their money on the wall with like a Picasso or something. Like he'll buy these like, you know, wines that cost thousands of dollars.
But he'll guzzle that bottle.
But he just goes hard with it. Like,
I haven't heard about that.
The rebuttal of his managers through their lawyers was like, well, a $30,000 per month investment in wine isn't an investment if you drink it.
Right. Well, good point.
To which Johnny Depp responded in this article, which is fantastic. I find that insulting. It was way more than 30,000.
Man. Yeah, but yeah, going back to Cocoon, the reason I brought it up was because when you told me about
BD
and old folks homes, it just reminded me how, you know, when the alien pods they rejuvenate them, right? And like Jessica Tandy and Hume Cronin just like become they're like fucking left and right, like they become like hot, right? like that's the concept behind like the movie. So that makes it funny to me. Like I do think it would not surprise me if this kind of thing goes on. Of course, I mean,
people are people.
People are people. If you can still, like you said, if you can still do it, go nuts, man.
I mean, now with Cialis,
yeah, it's like just enjoy yourself if you still can. I mean, you know.
You climb obstacles like old people fuck. You know that, Private Pile?
So he's writing letters to advertisers, and that's another cliche. That's a cliche, the whole idea of like the old coot who's like complaining about TV or whatever, and so he's writing a letter of complaint. And what it made me realize as I was watching that episode, I was like, okay, so this is 1990, and they're parodying the idea of an old coot sitting in his nursing home, like writing a letter of complaint to the media about something that offended him, right? And well, that used to happen. I mean, that used to happen. You if you picked up a magazine, you know, you'd see letters there, you know,
letters to the editor
complaining about something, right? And I said, well, that's how it was back then. And then
it was back then. Now everybody just complains on Facebook about everything all the time.
That's exactly that. That's what I was getting at. It's like now, it's like it's still it happened 30 years ago. It happened 50 years ago. It still happens today. Except we all have to fucking hear about it. It's all in our faces now.
Right. You had to write a letter and then go to the post office.
Then email came out, and so maybe now you could email. So there's still, but then comes social media. So now it's like now it's just in your fucking face. Now like that now. Grandpa Simpson would be on Facebook doing that, or on Twitter, and just be like, boom, 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 boom.
But not just old people.
He's old, so he was like Grandpa Simpson would be on Facebook because he's old. He wouldn't be on Twitter. But well, I mean, now again, I mean, James Woods is on Twitter. But it's not old people anymore only. It's not exclusively. Now it's become. It wasn't exclusively old people back then either, but. That was the cliche, but back then, anybody who had to stick up their ass about something, whether legitimate or not, had their way of doing it, you know, and complaining letters to the editor, and you know, honestly, it was better back then, in my opinion. Like that's easier because it's like, okay, you have a legitimate grievance, you will aim your grievance at the appropriate party, and hopefully they will address it. But somebody who has nothing to do with it and doesn't have to see it,
it's just
be annoyed by it. Yeah, it's just noise. It's noise, and it becomes meaningless.
I'm Wilford Brimley, and I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes about diabetes.
We'll never be sick, we won't get any older, and we won't ever die.
Back to the episode. What do we think of this episode?
I liked it. I liked it when I was a kid. I definitely remember seeing it. Because, again, I had a good belly laugh when he coughs up his hat. I was, a 9-year-old, and I like it now. All the subtext.
Yeah. It's pretty funny. Like there are better episodes. Like the thing about as you said, its heyday is not the first season.
No, I think its heyday is like 95 through 98, 2000-ish.
That's when they got really good, right?
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
Like I said, like I rewatched 7th season of Simpsons like a few years ago, and I couldn't believe how good it was. It had me like peeing myself laughing. It was so funny. I mean, and then there's those Conan O'Brien episodes he wrote.
Yeah, well, I think Conan O'Brien came in on season 4.
Yeah.
And he was only around for one season.
Maybe that's when it started getting really good.
That's where, yeah, I would say that's where it began. Like the golden age of The Simpsons arguably begins, I guess, around season 3 or 4. Now, there's good episodes before that, but like the real golden age where like things get really good is around season 3, 4, like that transitional period. And as you said, probably keeps on going for a few years till about 96, 97.
I mean, I guess, but when did it start to suck?
Well, with that, that's kind of the point of this podcast. We don't know. Or I don't know because I haven't actually watched it regularly since the late 90s.
Right.
So I know from...
I mean, has anybody... Because Simpsons memes now are such like a universal thing. But all the memes are based on like that era.
Sure. Because those are the best. That's the golden age of it, right?
They're things that everybody understands. It seems like everybody understands. So it's like we all stopped watching.
We all stopped watching. Some of us... because we can't speak for everyone, but some of us, I guess, quote unquote, outgrew it, I guess.
But it did get worse.
I guess it did get worse. Like I'm trying to figure out why I stopped watching, and it wasn't like this thing where, I don't like it anymore. It didn't happen that way. It's just that I began to pay attention to other things.
I think around the time the movie came out.
Well, that's like 2006.
Yeah.
And when the movie came out, I had already stopped watching regularly. I would still watch the old episodes.
I remember I had already stopped watching it for a few years by that point too, and I saw the movie and I wasn't into it.
You didn't particularly like the movie?
It was okay.
Right, but you weren't like blown away.
President Schwarzenegger, that was pretty funny.
That was funny. No, it's a funny movie. I'll talk about that when we get to it. I think I will cover the movie here at some point. Maybe. We'll see. But in any case, yeah, that's the thing. The reason why I'm doing this is because I don't even remember. Me personally, I didn't stop watching it because I didn't like it anymore. I just stopped watching it because I stopped watching it. Other things came up, and then part of it was also that, like, I hate watching it in Spanish.
Uh-huh.
I do not like it in Spanish, and since I've been living here for...
Yeah, me too. And I mean, obviously, English is my first language. I'm fluent in Spanish, but yeah, because a lot of the jokes don't make it.
It just doesn't translate well, in my opinion. Yeah.
But all of our native Spanish-speaking friends will tell you they like it way better in Spanish.
Oh, they love, but first of all, some of them, maybe English is not their first language anyway, so like whether they know English now or not, I can understand that. I mean, if that's what you're used to, if you're used to those voices and that, like, that's what you're used to, I can understand you preferring it, but, you know.
But I've had this argument with people who were like, no, it's way better in Spanish.
But for them to actually tell you it's better, that's ridiculous. Like for them to say, look, I prefer it, because this is what I'm used to, this is what I grew up with, this is how I like it. You're like, you know.
It can't be better because it is originally in English.
Right, so there's no way you can say it's better. Like, you can say like you prefer it because that's what you're used to, but better? That's a stretch. That's like a real stretch. But I get out of arguments like that. It's better for you, dude. It's better for you, and good for you. You know, it's like more power to you. But yeah, at some point I stopped watching. So now my idea is to I'm going back to the beginning and tracing the whole thing,
and kind of finding that point where.
And I want to see if there's an actual point. Like, where is that breaking point? Is it around
season? Because I mean, you know, growing up as a Metallica fan. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was definitely when the album Load came out, right? I mean, the first 5 Metallica albums are like amazing.
There is no question. Absolutely. Like,
I remember when that album came out when I was in 9th grade. I was like, I knew it was bad. And that was like, and all Metallica fans now know this, right? Like the first 5 albums. And some people don't like the Black Album because Bob Rock, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's good.
Yeah, it's a good album. I think exactly. I think you can.
But there's a definite like that album was when it.
Right. I mean, you could call the Black. If you want, you could say that if you're a purist, I guess you would say their last great album was Injustice for All, because obviously they made a very conscious move towards a slightly more commercial sound
on the Black Album.
That's why they got Bob Rock.
And they got Bob Rock, and Hetfield started doing this, like, yeah. And then Kirk Hammett with his wah-wah pedal, he's got a little bit more bluesy. It's like, okay, but it's still Metallica. But then the next album
It's still recognizably Metallica.
Yeah,
is what you're saying.
but then the next album was all about the and the bluesy guitar, and it's like, whoa, okay, well, this is just bad now.
Right. Well, I can recreate a moment in history. I think I was what Load's like what 96.
96.
If it's 96, then I was already out of it.
96.
Yeah, because I graduated from high school in 95. So if it was 96, I was already out of high school. But my point is, I'm sitting there, and they make a big deal about it. Like
it was a huge deal.
It was like the premiere of the new single was "Until It Sleeps."
Yeah.
I remember, and no one had heard it. You know, this before the internet. I mean, it was already there, but it wasn't quite as you couldn't really get
people
that.
People were sleeping outside of the record stores.
Exactly, it was still like that, and it was on. And I was here. It was here in the pilot, and it was on MTV, and they were announcing the premiere. I'm sitting there with my friends. We turn it on. It starts. It's this video directed by Samuel Bayer because it's got that Samuel Bayer like.
It's based on the Hieronymus Bosch paintings, right?
Right. Well, visually, it's an interesting concept.
But they were wearing
they look like shit, though. They don't look like Metallica.
No, they all had short hair, like they Kirk Hammett, I think, had like mascara running down his cheeks. I think Lars has like a feather. He has like a Ric Flair type thing around his neck at one point. What is this? Like they all had short hair, which is a huge deal.
Right. You go like, oh God, no. And then I'm listening to it, and the song sucks.
And it was like grungy. It was very much of that time.
Right. It was like ding 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 ding.
Yeah. There was none of the thrash metal left in it at all.
I'm just going, what is this? What is this? And I can respect musicians wanting to experiment and to go.
For sure.
It's your as a musician it's your right to do that. But I do think that at one point, I mean, look, you know what? It's their right. That's fine. For me, it's like there's people who maybe prefer that, who maybe grew up with that part of Metallica. Mm-hmm. But I mean, okay. But I mean, I don't understand. Like to me, that just really sucked.
Give me fuel, give me fire, give me that which I desire.
With the band, it could be very definitive. Like, okay,
that's why you go like, it's
that album's good.
That's the album.
That album sucks.
Where they just went downhill.
With the Simpsons, was it more of a gradual thing? Is that what you're trying to?
I would imagine that it probably was. I'd be very surprised if it's like, okay, this is the one episode where from this point on, every single episode now sucks. I doubt it. And I would even imagine that even today, I don't watch it, but even today, I would imagine there's a couple of diamonds in the rough. Mm. I mean, even now, it's still going on. It's 30. Season 30 something, and so you go like, I'm sure even now.
But didn't they stop it this year?
There's rumors that they're going to stop it, but they're renewed for 2 more seasons. Or something.
Wow!
As of today, as of March 1st, 2020, they are renewed for 1 or 2 more seasons, for sure.
I mean, whenever I check in with it now, like if I'm in a restaurant somewhere and it's on, usually like there's a lot of pop cultural references I don't understand.
Well,
that makes me feel old. Like, I understand Ed Sheeran or whoever is one of the most popular artists alive right now, but you could put a gun to my head. I couldn't name one of his songs at all.
I couldn't name you a song because but if one comes on right now, one of the hits, I'll be like, oh, that's the Ed Sheeran.
Yeah, I'm like that too.
Right, I couldn't tell you what it's called.
Or they're like, this makes me feel old, maybe.
Well, I'll tell you my experience, because the last time I watched a first run episode of The Simpsons was about maybe a year, maybe 2 years ago. Just I watched the Halloween episode. Uh-huh. It was one of the Halloween episodes, and it was a recent one, so it was maybe 2 years ago. And I sat there and I didn't laugh once. Right. Like I just sat there open mouth.
I mean, back in the day, the Halloween episode. I mean. Rolling the entire
right.
time.
I mean, any episode. I love the Halloween episodes had always been among my favorites. But any episode I would definitely laugh.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you look forward to this.
Right. But here it's like I didn't laugh once. And I go, this isn't funny. And that's where I told myself, I guess it's true that it's not good anymore. Mm-hmm. But going back to what I said, where maybe we've outgrown it. It's more like it was something that you were into at a certain time, and it had impact. That's why I do think it's primarily, at the beginning we said, it's a window to America, to American pop culture, but it's also a window to an era. I do think that the reason that its best years are in the 90s is because it really is a chronicle of the 90s. Because that it was birthed there, and it was the people who created it, they were, boomers in their 30s who were reflecting on their own culture as the writers changed because they moved on to other things, and then other stuff came out that ended up sort of surpassing, like doing what The Simpsons was already doing, but doing it better. Other shows, animated or not animated, started to do that same thing, which was so revolutionary by The Simpsons. Because when you look at The Simpsons, it may have been animated, but it could compete with live action comedy shows of its time, because it was doing stuff that was very revolutionary. But then eventually, shows like Arrested Development or whatever started to do the same thing, but just in live action, or just other shows just began to, and they go like, that is giving me the same value that I was getting from The Simpsons. Now I'm getting it here, so I don't need it from The Simpsons anymore. I think it's a combination of things.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the way it looks changed. Well,
it became gradually more and more sophisticated in the animation. Where you look at it now, and we just watched Bart the General, and I was going to say, wow, some of this animation's so wonky. It's just so rough.
Yeah,
but
sure.
And it has its charm. At the time, it was kind of had a charm to it, but that got good right away. Like it's not that gradual, but already season 2 and 3 have a marked improvement in the animation department. And then I think eventually it got to this really polished place where sort of uniform. Like now that's what it is, and sort of that's what it is. But it took maybe 2 seasons to really get to.
I thought I was too old. I thought my time had passed. I thought I'd never hear the screams of pain or see the look of terror in a young man's eyes. Thank heaven for children.
So this was a good talk then.
This was a good talk.
Yeah, this was fun. So thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
This was a lot of fun.
It was.
And I think we're going to do it again. It was fun. I want to have you here for like the second season.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think this is a really interesting idea for a podcast. All right. Thanks, man.
Thank you. See you. So that's it for this week's installment of the Simpsons Countdown. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this, please give us a like. If you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment or 2 expressing your appreciation. And if it isn't too much trouble, please do share this with all your friends, both virtual and actual, on your social media platform of choice. I'm Erix Antoine. Next time, I will be joined once again by Joshua Fine. We will be discussing the episode Moaning Lisa, which introduces Bleeding Gums Murphy to Springfield and the world. I hope you'll join us. In the meantime, stay safe.